Energy is one of the most overlooked mechanics in Magic, and probably for good reason, because it has never really worked in Commander. But let me show you why it's not just playable, but it's actually one of the most rewarding and complex decks you've ever played. Saheeli, Radiant Creator. Saheeli is a Temur energy commander that really hasn't gotten that much spotlight, but she deserves way more attention. She's one of the commanders that truly makes energy work, and she does it in a way that's both fun and very strong. If you've never played with energy before, here's how it works. Energy counters are a resource that you get as a player. They're not tied to any permanent. Energy just sits in a separate pool and opponents can't interact with it, and you can spend it however you like. Saheeli's first ability will generate you 1 energy whenever you cast an artifact or an artificer creature spell. And in a deck like this one where we play cheap artifacts and mana rocks, this means your energy pool will just fill up naturally over the course of the game. But her second ability is where things get absolutely wild. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you are allowed to pay 3 energy counters to create a token copy of any permanent you control. That token then becomes a 5/5 artifact creature. In addition to its other types, it gains haste and you have to sacrifice it at the end of the turn. And yeah, that's right, Saheeli doesn't only copy creatures. You can copy enchantments, you can copy non-creature artifacts, and you can even copy lands with this ability. And more importantly, since of how this ability is worded, you get every ETB trigger, every attack trigger, and every death trigger of the original permanent you just copied. This is by far one of the most complex decks I've ever made. But I'll try my best in this video to explain all the nifty synergies in this deck, because every single turn will present you with a ton of options. The right play depends on the current board state, timing, and whatever your opponents are doing. This isn't a deck you can just pick up and autopilot. Instead, it rewards sequencing, resource management, and knowing whenever you should commit and go for the win. And the complexity of this deck is what makes it so satisfying to play. After a lot of playtesting with this deck, I'd call this one of the most fun decks I've ever played. Once the engine is online, you'll be generating copies every turn, chaining together triggers, and just generating insane amounts of value. It's also important to note that this isn't some sort of dedicated energy deck. I decided to cut a lot of the weaker energy cards to make sure this deck was as powerful as possible. You only need 3 energy per turn to keep Saheeli's engine running. So the goal is to just generate enough energy for that without being locked into using any bad energy cards. Instead, this list runs a ton of strong copy targets and synergy pieces to make every Saheeli trigger matter. And since I wanted to see how far I could actually push a Saheeli deck, this is a no budget list. That being said, I did decide to exclude any tutor cards from this deck. By excluding tutors, you just ensure the gameplay stays varied and interactive, and you won't be tutoring up the same combo every single game. So if you're looking for a commander that makes energy truly viable and that challenges you with complexing but rewarding decision making, Saheeli is exactly that. As I do in all my videos, I will be going over every single card in the deck and explaining why I decided to include it. This video is divided up in 7 categories: the energy generators, the copy targets, the support cards, acceleration, card advantage, interaction and protection, and the lands. Let's get started by talking about the energy generators. This section is all about making sure we have 3 energy available every turn so we can make a copy with Saheeli. Royal Cartographer. This 2-drop creature will give us an energy counter whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control. A really simple but consistent source of energy generation over the course of the game. And this ability has a perfect synergy with the fetch lands we play in this deck, because playing and cracking a fetch land will actually grant you 2 energy counters, because 2 lands will enter the battlefield. And later in the game, if you do have a couple of energy generators on the battlefield, you can tap this creature, pay 6 energy, and you get to draw 3 cards, which is just an absolutely ridiculous amount of card advantage. Since in this deck you only need 3 energy per turn to use Saheeli's ability, at some point later in the game you will be left with excess energy in your energy pool, and this card just allows you to turn that into card advantage. A really simple but really efficient creature. Decoction Module. This 2-mana artifact will give you 1 energy counter whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, and this ability will trigger from any creature entering. If you you play a simple mana dork, you will get 1 energy. You make a copy with Saheeli, you will get 1 energy. You play a creature with the fabricate mechanic, making it enter with some 1/1 servo tokens, you will get 1 energy for the creature and 1 for each servo token that enters the battlefield. You attack with a creature with myriad and 2 extra token copies enter the battlefield, you will get 2 extra energy counters. This is probably the most efficient energy generator in the entire deck. And on top of that, for 4 mana and tapping this artifact, we can return a creature we control to our hand. You can use this to return any creature with a really good enter the battlefield effect back to your hand and just recast it again to gain the effect again. Or if an opponent is casting a spot removal spell or a board wipe, you can use this to return a valuable permanent to your hand and just save it from being destroyed. Era of Innovation. This 2 mana enchantment gives you the option to pay 1 generic mana whenever an artifact or an artificer enters the battlefield. When you do, it will generate you 2 energy. And obviously this ability will be really easy to trigger because we will be casting Saheeli, we'll be casting mana rocks, and this even triggers from the copies of Saheeli entering the battlefield because they will be artifact creatures. And later in the game, when we do have enough energy, we can pay 6 energy, sacrifice this enchantment, and we get to draw 3 cards. Another card that allows us later in the game to convert any excess energy into absolutely ridiculous card advantage. Pima Trailblazer, a 3 mana 3/3 creature with trample. And whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, we get to add that many energy counters to our pool. Now in some games, when you can get this out by turn 3, your opponents won't have any blockers yet. You can then just start swinging with this creature, connecting to your opponents, and you will be able to get a huge amount of energy in your pool. Once Saheeli is on the battlefield, you can actually make a copy of this creature, which will be a 5/5 creature with trample. When you then swing with it and connect to an opponent, you will just get a ton of energy refunded to you. So obviously this card is already a really good energy generator, but that's not the reason why it's included in the deck. The real reason why it's included is its exhaust ability. And exhaust ability basically means you can only activate this ability once per game. You can pay 6 energy to put 2 +1/+1 counters on this creature and then draw cards equal to the biggest power amongst creatures you control. Which baseline with this creature will draw you 5 cards for the low cost of 6 energy, which is a really good deal. And let's say you already activated the exhaust ability on the original card. Whenever you make a copy out of this with Saheeli, it will be a new instance of the card, allowing you to activate the exhaust ability once again, since you can only use the exhaust ability once per instance of the card. So if you create a token copy of an exhaust card, you can actually bypass the once per game restriction. Rogue Refiner, a simple 3 mana creature that whenever it enters a battlefield will draw us 1 card and generate us 2 energy counters. This creature is basically an energy generating cantrip, because whenever it enters, it just replaces itself by drawing us a card. And it's also a really good creature to target with Saheeli, because it will give you additional card advantage and additional energy to use on future turns. Now we do have to play some suboptimal energy generating cards in this deck, because nothing is as bad as actually having Saheeli and a great copy target on the battlefield but not having the energy to do so. Whirler Virtuoso, a 3 mana creature that whenever it enters the battlefield will generate you 3 energy counters, which is just the perfect amount of energy for Saheeli. Playing this creature will guarantee you that you can use Saheeli's ability. And on top of that, its activated ability allows us to turn 3 energy into 1/1/1 flying top tier token. Pretty good effect if you do need some chum blockers later in the game. And we also use this creature for one of the infinite combos in this deck I will be explaining later in the video. Aetherworks Marvel. This 4 mana artifact will give us 1 energy counter whenever a permanent is put into our graveyard. On paper, this card might seem really underwhelming, but it will generate you a ton of energy over the course of the game. Whenever you create a copy with Saheeli and it has to be sacrificed at the end of turn, it will generate you 1 energy. If you do have some top tier tokens around and you use them to block, it will generate you energy, since tokens actually hit the graveyard. Or if an opponent is using spot removal on one of your creatures, or even casting a board wipe, this artifact will generate you a huge amount of energy. And on top of that, we can also tap this card and pay 6 energy to activate its ability, allowing us to look at the top 6 6 cards of our library, pick one of those cards and cast it for free without paying its mana cost. Once again, a card that allows you later in the game when you do have a huge amount of excess energy to just turn it into a beneficial effect that will allow you to cheat anything into play. Nissa, Royal Soul Speaker. This card is basically the 4 mana variant of Royal Cartographer. Whenever a land enters a battlefield under your control, she will generate you 2 energy. And this effect can get really crazy, especially with fetch lands, because playing a fetch land and cracking it will actually give you 4 energy. The landfall ability is the main reason why this card is included in the deck, but on top of that, it even has an activated ability. Instead of paying the usual mana cost for any permanent card in our hand, we can choose to instead pay 8 energy for it. Some games, when you play this deck, you will just have a huge amount of excess energy. And then later in the game, when you have no other uses for this excess energy, Nissa actually allows you to use it to cheat some of your biggest permanents into play. And I'm gonna be honest, in the 50 games I did play with this deck, I only used this ability in like 5 of those games. But every time I did, it just won me the game on the spot. One little thing to notice, that Nissa is a legendary creature. So making a copy out of it with Saheeli won't actually work, because you will get 2 Nissas and you will have to sacrifice one of those due to the legend rule. Lightning Runner, a 5 mana 2/2 double strike haste creature. And this card is probably one of the most well-known energy cards out there, because it basically goes infinite with just about anything. Whenever this creature attacks, you get to add 2 energy to your energy pool. Then you get the ability to pay 8 energy. When you do, you get to untap all creatures you control, and you get to have an additional combat phase after this one. And this means a couple of things. Because it is an additional combat phase and Saheeli actually triggers at the beginning of combat, you will get another opportunity to pay 3 energy to make a copy with Saheeli. And in the additional combat phase, you will also get the opportunity to attack with Lightning Runner again. And for as long as you can keep attacking with Lightning Runner and opponents can block it, and you do have the ability to keep paying 8 energy every single combat phase, you will get infinite combat phases. Now in this deck, we do run 2 infinite combos with Lightning Runner, and I will be explaining how they work in a couple of minutes when we get to the second card of this infinite combo. Gonti's Aether Heart. Whenever this 6 mana artifact or another artifact enters the battlefield under our control, we get to add 2 energy counters to our energy pool. It will trigger from itself, it will trigger from any artifact Saheeli copies you make, it triggers from any Topters or Servos entering the battlefield under your control, and it even triggers when you play a mana rock. Now the energy this card will generate you is obviously insane, but it does come at a hefty cost of 6 mana. And that is because it has the craziest activated ability out of any energy based card. By paying 8 energy and exiling this artifact, you get to take an extra turn. Yeah, that's right, you just get an extra turn. No strings attached. There are no downsides to this effect. And usually how this card works is that you can just leave it on the battlefield, generating you a huge amount of energy. At some point you will get enough energy to actually activate its effect, and then you can just wait on the perfect turn to activate it and actually close out the game with it. And we also use this card in an infinite combo in the deck. Don't worry, it's not an infinite combo where you take infinite turns, because nobody likes that. For this combo, you need 3 specific cards on the battlefield. Gonti's Aether Heart, Decoction Module, and a Whirler Virtuoso. And to get the loop started, you also need 3 energy. First up, you start by paying 3 energy to activate the Whirler Virtuoso's ability, creating you a 1/1 Topter token. The Topter will then enter the battlefield, and it will trigger Gonti's Aether Heart and Decoction Module. The Gonti trigger will then give you 2 energy, and the Decoction Module trigger will then give you 1 energy. In total, you will have gained 3 energy, and you can just start the loop all over again, generating you infinite Topter tokens in the process. Pretty simple, but pretty awesome combo. Aetherwind Basker, a 7 mana 7/7 trample creature. And whenever this creature enters the battlefield or attacks, we get to add 1 energy to our energy pool for every creature we control. Yeah, this card will just generate you insane amounts of energy. It will give you immediate value whenever it enters, and on future turns whenever you attack with it. And if you can start copying this creature with Saheeli, it will just give you double the energy generation. And on top of that, it also has an activated ability that allows allows you to pay 1 energy to give it +1/+1 until the end of turn, which honestly is just perfect for this card because you can just start pumping any excess energy into this card and it will be able to deal a huge amount of damage, especially because it has trample. And this is actually the second card we need for the Lightning Runner infinite combo in this deck. And let me just explain to you how it works. For the first combo line, you'll need a couple of things. You need a Lightning Runner on the battlefield, and you need an Aetherwind Basker on the battlefield that doesn't have Summoning Sickness. You'll also need a total of 6 creatures on the battlefield, and you also need at least one opponent that cannot block and destroy Lightning Runner during combat. You go to combat and you declare Lightning Runner and Aetherwind Basker as attackers. First, you then resolve the Aetherwind Basker trigger, giving you 6 energy because you control a total of 6 creatures, and then you resolve the trigger of Lightning Runner, giving you an additional 2 energy, and then allowing you to pay your total of 8 energy to just untap everything and get another combat phase. You can then just keep repeating this because now you will have infinite combat phases. And if you control more than 6 creatures, this combo will also net you infinite energy counters, which you can then use to pump up your Aetherwind Basker to infinite power, infinite toughness, and you can take every opponent out of the game this way. And as I said, there's also a second variant of this combo line using Saheeli. For this combo, you need Saheeli on the battlefield, Lightning Runner on the battlefield, and an Aetherwind Basker. And you'll also need 4 available energy to use. The benefit of this combo, comparing it to the previous one, is that you don't need to control 6 creatures, and the Aetherwind Basker doesn't have to be able to attack. So you can just use this combo instantly the turn the card comes down. You go to combat and you will then get a Saheeli trigger. You pay 3 energy and you create a haste copy of Aetherwind Basker. The copy will enter the battlefield and it will trigger, giving us 1 energy for each creature we control. Then we move to combat and we declare attackers with Lightning Runner and with Aetherwind Basker. Aetherwind Basker will trigger, and once again we will get energy equal to the amount of creatures we control. Then Lightning Runner will trigger and we will get an additional 2 energy, and we will pay 8 energy to just untap everything and get another combat phase. And then the loop just repeats itself. We go to our next combat phase, we can make a copy out of Aetherwind Basker with Saheeli again, netting us even more energy, and this combo will generate us infinite Aetherwind Baskers, infinite energies, infinite tokens entering the battlefield, and you can then just use the infinite energy to pump into your Aetherwind Basker tokens and just win the game that way. This combo is a little bit more complex than the previous one, but it is way more efficient since you can just instantly give the Aetherwind Basker token haste with Saheeli and instantly win the game this way. And we also play 2 really simple 1 mana energy generators in this deck. The first being Attune with Aether. For 1 mana you get a sorcery spell that will add 2 energy to your pool and will allow you to search your library for a basic land and put it into your hand. The basic land effect is pretty neat because it will filter lands out of your deck, increasing the chances you actually draw a card instead of a land, and it will ensure you don't miss a land drop on future turns. And we do have to play energy generating spells like this one, because if you build your board with Saheeli and some really great creatures to copy, if you don't actually have any point of energy, Saheeli just doesn't work and you can't start copying. And the last really cheap energy generating cantrip in this section is Tune the Narrative. For 1 mana on instant speed, you get to draw a card and add 2 energy to your energy pool. And this is basically a free energy generation card, because it will just replace itself by drawing you a card and the energy just stays in your pool. This card might seem really underwhelming or really weird, but it's probably one of the cards that helps you out most to actually get to the 3 energy threshold to start creating token copies with Saheeli with. Before we continue, a quick shout out to all the YouTube members that make this channel possible. Thanks to you, I can keep doing what I love doing most. Make some really in-depth deck techs. If you're enjoying these deep dive commander videos, or you're just using these videos to fall asleep to my voice, consider joining the YouTube membership program. You'll get early access to the deck list for these videos before the videos even go live. You get access to exclusive Discord channels where I do share some sneak peeks as to what decks I'm currently working on, and you'll get access to some awesome Panzer MTG emojis you can use anywhere on Discord or YouTube. So if that sounds fun, or you just want to support your favorite MTG content creator, click the join button below the video or check out the link in the description below. Next up, we have the copy targets. And this is where things get really spicy. Saheeli can copy any permanent, so this deck is packed with some of the cards that have the biggest impact whenever they enter, attack or leave the battlefield. Goldvein Hydra. For 1 green mana plus X you get a Vigilance, Trample, Haste body, and it will enter the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters equal to the amount of mana you paid for the X. So you can both cast this for 2 mana, making it enter as a 1/1 creature, or you can pay a total of 11 mana to make it enter as a huge 10/10 body. And whenever this creature dies, you get to create a number of tapped treasure tokens equal to its power whenever it died. And that ability is just absolutely ridiculous when you combine it with Saheeli's copy effect. Because let's say you have Saheeli on the battlefield, you can then just cast this card for 2 mana. It will enter as a 1/1 creature, and then you can make a 5/5 copy out of it with Saheeli. If the copy then dies or it gets sacrificed at the end of your turn, you will get to generate 5 tapped treasure tokens, which is just an absolutely ridiculous amount of mana acceleration. This is by far one of the most efficient copy targets in the entire deck because you can cast it for a low cost of just 2 mana. Pyrogoyf, a 4 mana Lurgoyf creature that has the same effect as a regular Tarmogoyf. Its power is equal to the total number of different card types in all graveyards, and its toughness is equal to that number plus 1. Card types being things like enchantment, sorcery, instant, land, creature, whatever. Now honestly, that ability doesn't really matter. It's all about the second ability. Whenever Pyrogoyf or any other Lurgoyf enters a battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. In your average commander game, its power will usually be an average of 5. Since creatures will be removed, you will be cracking fetch lands, enchantments will get milled into the graveyard, and whenever this creature then enters, you can use its damage to actually destroy one of your opponent's most valuable creatures, or just deal a huge chunk of damage to the life total of one of your opponents. But where things get really crazy is whenever you can start making token copies of this card by using Saheeli. First up, let me clarify a really weird ruling sting. Whenever you make a copy out of this creature by using Saheeli, its stats will always be 5/5. It won't take into account anymore what kind of card types are in graveyards. It will just have 5 power and 5 toughness. That being said, whenever you make a copy out of this card, you will get to deal a huge amount of damage. Let's say you already have a Saheeli on the battlefield, 3 energy available, you just cast a Goyf, it will deal damage equal to its power, you activate Saheeli, create a copy out of it, will trigger itself, and then the original will also see the other one entering and will trigger, giving you a total of 3 Pyrogoyf triggers whenever you cast it. Pretty sick value. And as you will see later in this video, we do play a ton of effects that allow us to generate double the amount of tokens, and the value you'll get out of a Pyrogoyf then is just absolutely ridiculous. Cultivator of Blades, a 5 mana 1/1 creature with the Fabricate 2 mechanic, meaning whenever this creature enters a battlefield, you can choose to either make it enter with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, or with 2 1/1 servo tokens. Now in most cases you will be using the Fabricate to generate you some servo tokens, which will give you extra energy with cards like Deconcoction Module, and they will just function as some chump blockers to protect your life total. And whenever this creature attacks, all other attacking creatures we control will gain +X+X, X being the amount of power this creature has. And you can probably see where I'm going with this. Whenever you copy this card with Saheeli, let's say you choose to make it enter with 2 +1/+1 counters, it will have a total of 7 power because Saheeli makes 5/5 token copies. The token copy will have haste, and when you then swing with it, all your other attacking creatures will get a massive +7/+7 stat boost, which is just beyond ridiculous. And let's say the original creature can stick to the battlefield for an entire turn. On your next turn, you can just make a copy again, attack with both this creature and the original, and you can actually decide how to stack your attack triggers. You create a new copy with Saheeli, being a 7/7 body, you attack with everything you got, and you will get 2 triggers on the stack. One of the original Cultivator of Blades and one out of the token copy. Since you do control both triggers, you can actually choose how you want these triggers to resolve. Let's say you first resolve the ability of the token copy of this card, giving every attacking creature +7/+7. This will boost the stat of the original Cultivator of Blades to 8/8. Then the second trigger of the original Cultivator of Blades goes on the stack, and you will get to give all your attacking creatures an additional +8/+8, resulting in a total +15/+15 stat boost. Like I said in the intro, this is a pretty complex deck and it has some really crazy synergies and triggers. You'll really have to be aware when you play this deck of how you stack your triggers and what triggers actually go onto the stack. Octomancer, a 5 mana frog druid from the Bloom Burrow set. And honestly, before making this deck, I didn't even know this card existed, and it's absolutely crazy. This card has the gift mechanic, meaning whenever it enters a battlefield, you may have an opponent create an 8/8 octopus token. Now I can already hear you thinking, why would you ever do this? Let's have a look at its second ability. At the beginning of each end step, we get to create a token copy of any creature token that entered the battlefield this turn. So if you do decide to give the octopus, this creature will trigger at the end of your turn. It saw the 8/8 octopus enter and you will get an octopus token for yourself. Now that octopus synergy is already really crazy, but it's not a reason why we run this card in this deck. We mainly run this card in this deck because it has an insane synergy with the tokens that Saheeli creates. Let's say we control Saheeli and an Octomancer. We go to combat and we decide to create a 5/5 token copy of the Octomancer. We go to combat, both our Octomancers survive, and then we go to the end step, and we will now have 3 triggers on the stack. 2 Octomancer triggers and 1 Saheeli trigger. The first Octomancer trigger will check if any creature tokens are created, and since we made a copy out of Octomancer, we will get another 5/5 Octomancer copy. Then the ability of our first Octomancer copy will also trigger and give us another Octomancer copy. Then the Saheeli trigger will resolve and we do have to sacrifice our first Octomancer copy. Then our turn does end and we are left with 1 original Octomancer and 2 5/5 Octomancer copies. And as you can imagine, that is some pretty good value, right? And if you can then keep these 3 Octomancer copies on the battlefield, whenever you then go to your next turn, you will get even more Octomancer copies and they will all stay on the battlefield permanently, which is just absolutely exponential value. I can guarantee you every game you are gonna play with this deck, you'll find more and more synergies and interactions. It's just endless, and this is why this deck is so much fun. Overlord of the Houndwoods, a 5 mana creature from the Duskmourn set. And this creature has the impending mechanic, meaning instead of casting it for its full mana cost, we can also cast it for 3 mana. It will then enter the battlefield as an enchantment, which is not a creature, and it will enter with 4 time counters on it. And at the beginning of each of our end steps, we get to remove a time counter from it, and whenever this creature has no time counters on it, it will be an actual creature you can block and swing with. And whenever this card enters the battlefield or it attacks, we get to create a tapped everywhere token, which is a land token that has every basic land type, meaning we can tap it for mana of any color. Now obviously this is a fantastic way to accelerate our mana. Even if we cast this card for its impending cost, it will still enter the battlefield and generate us at least 1 token. We won't be able to attack with it until all the time counters are removed, but that doesn't matter because we can bypass this mechanic using Saheeli. Because as I mentioned earlier in the video, you can copy any permanent using Saheeli. Even if this card is still an enchantment, you can create a 5/5 token copy with it. The copy will enter the battlefield, you will get another everywhere token, and since the copy has haste, you can instantly swing with it and get another everywhere token. Meaning whenever you copy this card with Saheeli, it will grant you 2 land tokens and accelerate your mana by a huge amount. Twin Flame Tyrant, a 5 mana dragon that will double any amount of damage any source we control would deal to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls. So baseline, for as long as you control this creature, any source of damage you deal will be doubled, which already in itself is really solid. But if you copy this creature with Saheeli, you will actually get 2 instances of this effect and you will get to quadruple any amount of damage you would deal. Let's say you control an original Twin Flame Tyrant and then you copy it with Saheeli. The copy will be a 5/5 flying creature with haste, and if you swing with it and connect to an opponent, it will deal 5 damage multiplied by 2, resulting in 10 damage, and then you get to double that 10 damage once again, resulting in a total of 20 damage. And this is just taking into account you swinging with one 5/5 creature. Just imagine swinging with an entire board of creatures at all of your opponents. Even a small 1/1 servo token will now deal 4 damage to any creature that blocks it or any opponent it deals damage damage too. This card is just really good to close out games with. Podbreaker Ibex. For 6 mana, you get a 3/3 creature that whenever it attacks will give all creatures you control plus XX and trample. X being the greatest power amongst creatures you control. When you copy this card with Saheeli, it will be a 5/5 creature, and if you then attack with it, it will give your entire board plus 5/5 and trample. An effect that is really similar to a Crater Hoof Behemoth and will allow you to close out games. And like I explained with Cultivator of Blades, if you actually control the original and a copy of this creature, you can just stack the triggers. Let's say the original is at 3 power and the copy is at 5 power. You can just swing with both, resolve the trigger of the copy first, give everything plus 5/5, then the trigger of the original will resolve and it will be at 8 power, giving your entire board an additional plus 8/8 and trample, resulting in a total plus 15 stat boost for your entire board. If you can't close out the game with that kind of effect, I don't know what will. Agent of Treachery. This 7 mana creature will allow you to gain control of any permanent on the battlefield whenever it enters. You can use this effect to steal your opponent's commanders, their most valuable creatures, or you can even use this to steal their lands. And this effect is permanent. Even if this creature leaves the battlefield, you still get to keep the permanent you stole. And obviously this is a really good copy target for Saheeli because it will just allow you to steal even more permanents. But it doesn't even stop there. On top of that already really crazy effect, it has an additional ability. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 3 permanents you don't own, you get to draw 3 cards. Meaning whenever the first ability triggered a total of 3 times, it will give you some insane card advantage. And let's say you have both the original and a copy of this card on the battlefield and you control 3 permanents you don't own, both abilities will trigger, drawing you a total of 6 cards, which is just an insane amount of card draw. Cyberman Squadron. By far the most complex card in this entire deck, because you will need a calculator to actually know how many copies you will be generating with this. And that is because of his ability. Non-legendary creatures you control have Myriad. Myriad means whenever a creature with Myriad attacks, you get to create a copy of that creature that stepped in attacking at all your other opponents. So usually you will swing a creature with Myriad at opponent 1 and you will just generate a copy attacking opponent 2 and 3. You do have to exile the copies generated with Myriad at the end of combat. Since the token copies we generate with Saheeli will be artifacts, it's really easy to get a Cyberman trigger on them. Let's just say you have a Twin Flame Tyrant on the battlefield and you decide to copy it with Saheeli. Let's say you then decide to swing with the 5/5 copy of Twin Flame Tyrant and you have Cyberman on the battlefield. You will now generate an additional 2 copies of Twin Flame Tyrant attacking your other opponents, which will also be 5/5 flying creatures. Since you then have 4 Twin Flame Tyrants on the battlefield, you will get to double your damage they deal 4 times. 5 damage, 10 damage, 20 damage, 40 damage. Meaning if your opponents can block the 5/5 creature tokens attacking them, they will take 40 damage and they will instantly be taken out of the game. And this effect works with a ton of other cards in the deck. Overlord of the Houndwoods will generate you a ton of everywhere tokens. Pyrogoyf will see all other Pyrogoyfs entering and deal a huge amount of damage. And an Agent of Treachery copied by Myriad will just steal your entire opponent's board. And on top of that, to make it even more complex, you can also use Saheeli to copy this card. And yes, the Myriad does stack, and all artifact creatures you control will have 2 instances of Myriad, meaning whenever they attack, they will generate 4 token copies of themselves. I could give an example of how crazy the amount of value you can generate with this is, but you can do the math. Molten Primordial, a 7 mana creature with haste, and whenever it enters the battlefield, for each opponent you get to pick one of their creatures, gain control of it until the end of turn, and it will also gain haste. In itself, this is already a really great card because you will get a huge haste body, you will get to steal creatures, and your opponents will have less blockers. You can then just step everything sideways and deal a huge amount of damage by combat. And as you can imagine, when you copy this card with Saheeli, it gets even better, because you will get another 5/5 haste creature to swing with and you will get to steal 2 creatures from each opponent and actually swing with them. Threefold Thunderhulk, a 7 mana 0/0 artifact creature that will enter the battlefield with 3+1/+1 counters on it. And whenever it enters a battlefield or it attacks, we get to generate X 1/1 gnome artifact tokens, X being the amount of power this creature has. So in itself, whenever it enters a battlefield, it will already generate you 3 1/1 tokens, which you can then use as chump blockers or buff up with any of the power boosting effects in this deck. And if you do make a copy out of this with Saheeli, it will be a 5/5 creature, but it will enter with 3 additional +1/+1 counters. So it will enter with a total of 8 power and 8 1/1 gnome tokens. The 8/8 copy will then also have haste, and whenever you then swing with it, you get to generate an additional 8 1/1 counters, resulting in you getting 16 1/1 creatures whenever you copy this with Saheeli. Just imagine having 16 of these 1/1 creatures on the battlefield and then swinging with a Pod Breaker Ibex. The amount of damage done will just be ridiculous. And all these artifact creatures entering will also trigger cards like Decoction Module, generating you a huge amount of energy in the process. Vaultborn Tyrant, a 7 mana trample creature that whenever this or another creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control will give you 4 life, and you also get to draw a card. So whenever you cast this creature, it will already replace itself by drawing you a card. And whenever you make a copy out of any creature with Saheeli, this card will also draw you a card because it will enter as a 5 power creature. And the reason why I love this card so much is whenever this creature would die, whenever it is not a token, you get to create a token copy out of this card. Obviously, this ability won't work when you copy it with Saheeli because it will be a token, but it makes it really hard for your opponents to deal with this creature, because first they will have to remove the original and then they still have the token to deal with. And the last card in this section is Craterhoof Behemoth. A classic card that everyone knows. For 8 mana you get a 5/5 creature with haste. And whenever this creature enters, all creatures you control will gain +X and trample until the end of turn, X being the amount of creatures you control. Craterhoof is a classic game finisher, and that is because it's a huge haste body that will just buff up your entire board and give it trample, making it really easy to close out the game with. And in this deck you can even use Saheeli to make a token copy out of it and just double up on its effect and give an even bigger stat boost. Next up we have the support cards. These are the cards that just amplify all the synergies we already have in the deck and allow Saheeli to snowball entirely out of control. Determined Iteration. This 2 mana enchantment allows us to populate at the beginning of combat. Populate means we get to pick any token we control on the battlefield and create a copy out of it. And thanks to this enchantment, that copy will also gain haste, but it will have to be sacrificed at the end of our turn. Whenever we go to combat, we will get a Saheeli trigger on the stack, allowing us to pay 3 energy to make a copy, and we will get a trigger of discard on the stack. Since we control both triggers, we can choose the order, and obviously we will be resolving Saheeli's trigger first, creating a copy of any permanent we control, and then we get to resolve the trigger on discard, just allowing us to create another copy of the copy we just made, and this card will essentially double up on our token production, doubling up on all the ETB effects, attack effects, or leave the battlefield effects. Really efficient card for just 2 mana. Saheeli, the Sun's Brilliance. This card is basically the 2 mana variant of our commander, because for 2 mana and tapping this creature, we get to pick any artifact or creature we control and create an artifact token copy of it. It will gain haste, and we have to sacrifice it at the beginning of our next end step. When we compare this card to our commander, the limitations are that we can only target creatures or artifacts, not any of our enchantments, and this card won't make the tokens into 5/5 copies. They will just retain their original stats. That being said, this is a perfect way to gain even more value out of our commander, because we can make a copy out of an enchantment with our commander first. For example, it will be an artifact creature, and then we can actually use this creature. And this way it does allow us to use the 2 mana Saheeli to even copy any permanent. A pretty good backup card for when you don't have your commander available to you. Esoteric Duplicator, a 3 mana artifact with a really weird but really potent ability. Whenever we sacrifice this card or any other artifact we control, we get the ability to pay 2 generic mana. When we do, at the beginning of the next end step, we get to create a copy of the sacrificed artifact. Now this ability is pretty weird, but let me just explain to you how this actually works. Let's say you have Saheeli on the battlefield and you do decide to make a copy out of a Twin Flame Tyrant, for example. You go to combat, you swing with it, and then you go to your end step, and you do have to sacrifice a token copy of Twin Flame Tyrant generated by Saheeli. Then a trigger of Esoteric Duplicator will go on the stack, and you do get the option to pay 2 generic mana. When you do, at the beginning of the next end step, so the end step of your opponent, Esoteric Duplicator will create you a new 5/5 copy of Twin Flame Tyrant that you get to keep permanently. So what this card does in a nutshell is essentially allow you to retain any copies you created with Saheeli for the small cost of 2 generic mana. It's a really complex card to use and it can get crazy sometimes, but you'll just have to play the deck to experience how crazy this card can actually be. And on top of that, for 2 generic mana and sacrificing this card, we get to draw a card. Whenever you activate this ability, once again, you can pay 2 generic mana to just get a copy of this card back on the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step, allowing you to just turn generic mana into card advantage. Simulacrum Synthesizer, a 3 mana artifact that whenever it enters a battlefield allows you to scry 2. And whenever any other artifact enters a battlefield under your control with mana value 3 or greater, you get to create a 0/0 construct token, which will get +1/+1 for every artifact you control. Now, whenever you make a copy out of something with Saheeli, it will actually retain the mana cost of the original permanent. So basically, every time you use Saheeli's trigger, you will get to generate one of these construct tokens. And the more of these construct tokens you have, the stronger they actually become, because you will control more and more artifacts. Simulacrum Synthesizer really is one of the most powerful artifact cards ever printed, and it can win games all by itself. And obviously, you can also copy Simulacrum Synthesizer itself by using Saheeli. And when you can just double up on this card's effect, the amount of construct tokens you generate will be absolutely ridiculous. Because this card costs 3 mana itself, so it will trigger itself and any copies you have of this card. Worldwalker Helm, a 3 mana artifact that says whenever you create an artifact token, you get to create an additional map token. Now, map tokens are simple little artifacts that allow you to sacrifice them to make a creature explore, but we don't really care about using them. I suppose the additional map tokens can be nice later in the game if you do need some lands or some counters on something you control, but the main function of these is just leaving them on the board so we control more artifacts for the golems of, for example, Simulacrum Synthesizer. The real reason why this card is included in the deck is its activated ability. For 2 mana and tapping this card, we get to create a token copy of any artifact token we control. So whenever we generate an artifact copy with our commander, we can just pay 2 mana, tap this thing, and we will get an additional copy, which we don't even have to sacrifice at the end of the turn, and we permanently get to keep on the board. And if you want to get really crafty, you can even use Saheeli to target Worldwalker Helm, and you can just generate more and more copies out of this card by using its effect on itself, and all of them will be 5/5 artifact creatures. Aether Revolt, a 4 mana energy based enchantment. And this card has the Revolt mechanic, meaning as long as a permanent we control left the battlefield this turn, its effect will be active. Being whenever a source we control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage +2 instead. Now in this deck we don't play that many group slug effects that ping damage to our opponents, but this card also has a second ability. Whenever we would get 1 or more energy, Aether Revolt will deal that much damage to any target. And this damage obviously is boosted by Aether Revolt's first effect. So every point of energy we gain will allow us to shoot a free lightning bolt at any target. We can use this to ping down our opponents or to remove any creatures on the battlefield we don't like. And you can also use Saheeli to make a copy out of this card, meaning you will get an additional boost to your non-combat damage by 2 points, and you will get to deal an additional 1 damage per energy you generate. And a combination of 2 of these enchantment cards can sometimes allow you to just gain a couple of points of energy and just ping an opponent out of the game with the effects. Now in this deck it might be a little hard to trigger the Revolt mechanic sometimes, making a permanent you control leave the battlefield. The best way you can do it in this deck is by actually using fetch lands. Just sacrificing a fetch land, the permanent left the battlefield and Revolt will be active. And now let's get into the best card in the entire deck. Parallel Lives. This 4-mana enchantment says whenever a token would be created under your control, you get to generate twice that many tokens instead. So first up, whenever we copy any permanent with Saheeli, we actually get to create 2 copies out of it thanks to Parallel Lives. And the additional copy generated by Parallel Lives will not have to be sacrificed at the end of turn because it is not created by Saheeli. That way we do actually get to keep 1 token we create. And this card doesn't only work for Saheeli, it works for anything in this deck that creates tokens. Be it a Simulacrum Synthesizer, an Esoteric Duplicator, a Worldwalker Helm, an Overlord of the Houndwoods, or even the 1/1 gnomes that 3-fold Thunderhurl will generate us. And there are many more instances of token generation in this deck. But the best part about this card and where things get absolutely ridiculous is that you can use Saheeli to create actual token copies out of Parallel Lives. And this is probably the best thing you can copy in this entire deck because it allows this deck to snowball absolutely out of control. Let's say you control Saheeli and a Parallel Lives. You then get a Saheeli trigger and you do decide to copy the Parallel Lives. This will trigger the original Parallel Lives and you will actually get to generate 2 token copies out of it. One that you will have to sacrifice to Saheeli at the end of the turn, but the second copy will just stay on the battlefield because it is not created by Saheeli. Then you go to the next turn and you do have 2 copies of Parallel Lives. Once again, you do decide to copy a Parallel Lives with Saheeli, and the tokens will now be doubled up twice. So you will now generate 4 additional Parallel Live copies, which you will only have to sacrifice 1 of at the end of the turn. You will then control 5 copies of Parallel Lives, pass the turn, and then you can use Saheeli again. Now this time you will double up 5 times on the token generation of a Parallel Lives copy, generating you a total of 1, 2, 4, 8, 16 copies of Parallel Lives, which will all be 5/5 creatures with haste you can instantly swing with. And you will only have to sacrifice 1 of these tokens at the end of your turn. As you can imagine, if your opponents have no way to deal with the Parallel Lives and you can just keep copying it over and over every single turn with Saheeli, this will just be an automatic win. And let's take a moment to appreciate the new art that Parallel Lives got in the Spider-Man set. The art in the Spider-Man set is absolutely fantastic, but this has to be my favorite art piece in that entire set. And the last card in this section is Radiant Preformer, a 5-mana 2/2 creature with flash. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, we get to pick any spell or ability on the stack that only has 1 target. Then we get to copy that ability for each legal target that ability has. Now this card might seem really weird, but it has an insane synergy with Saheeli. Things do get a little complex with this because Saheeli actually has a reflexive trigger. This basically means her ability works in 2 triggers. The first trigger being whenever we move to combat, we do get the option to pay 3 energy. When we do, the first part of the reflexive trigger has resolved, and then we go to the second part of the trigger, allowing us to create a 5/5 artifact creature token copy of it that we have to sacrifice at the end of turn. After the first ability has resolved and we did pay the 3 energy, you can then flash in a Radiant Performer. It doesn't even matter what permanent you targeted with Saheeli's ability, Radiant Performer will target every permanent you control and you will get to create a 5/5 artifact creature token copy of it, which as you can imagine is absolutely insane and will just win you the game on the spot. Let's say you control 5 lands, 2 mana rocks and 3 creatures. Since this card will copy Saheeli's ability to all of those permanents, it will copy your entire board and you just get double the value on anything. You can then just swing with all these token copies and just take an opponent out of the game, but since this card will also allow you to generate copies out of your lands, you can also produce a huge amount of mana with this effect. It's a really insane 2-card combo that's just way too good not to include in this deck. And since Saheeli's ability doesn't actually cost mana but energy counters, you only need 5 mana to make this interaction work. Before we move on, let's actually compare Saheeli to the only other viable energy commander we have, Satya Aetherflux Genius. Satya is in Jeskai colors, giving you access to white cards instead of green cards. And he has a way more aggressive ability. Whenever he attacks, he makes a copy out of any creature you control and he will give you free energy. The downside when comparing him to Saheeli is that he can only copy creatures and he won't turn them into 5/5 bodies. Saheeli does have a way harder time actually generating energy counters, but in return she can copy any permanent, which as you already saw in this video enables some really crazy interactions. Saheeli is definitely way slower than Satya and way more complex to pilot, but honestly that's exactly why I love her. In my opinion, Saheeli is just a ton more fun because every turn you play with her feels like a little puzzle where you have to manage your resources. So Satya is definitely a great pick if you want an aggressive and explosive energy deck that's really easy to pilot, but Saheeli is the more rewarding and complex version that feels a lot more fun to play. Next up we have the acceleration section. Since Saheeli is a really mana hungry commander, we do run a mix of mana dorks, mana rocks and very unique acceleration options. And keep in mind, any mana rock we play in this deck also is an artifact and will give us 1 energy whenever we have Saheeli on the battlefield. Birds of Paradise, a 1 mana 0/2 flying creature that we can tap to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Pretty self-explanatory, one of the most efficient mana dorks ever printed. Allows us to accelerate our mana as early as turn 1, we can use this to fix any of our colors, and later in the game we can use it as a chump blocker to block any huge flying creatures. Sol Ring, another obvious auto-inclusion in the deck because it is just one of the most efficient mana rocks ever printed. Especially since we do play a ton of really expensive cards in this deck, we will always have a use for the colorless mana this simple artifact generates. We also play 4 2-mana rocks we can tap to add mana to our mana pool, being an Arcane Signet and 3 of the Talismans. We can use all of these cards to accelerate our mana, and whenever we cast them, they will also generate us 1 energy whenever we have Saheeli on the battlefield. Herd Heirloom, a new 2-mana rock we got in the Tarkir Dragonstorm set. We can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, but we can only use that mana to cast a creature spell, which honestly in this deck is perfectly fine because we do play a ton of creatures and we can also use this mana for Saheeli. But the reason why it's included in the deck is its second ability. We can tap it to give any creature with power 4 or greater trample and a new line of text until the end of turn, being whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, we get to draw a card. And this ability is just perfect with the 5/5 creature tokens that Saheeli will generate us. We can then just tap this simple mana rock and actually get to gain some card advantage out of it. Bloom Tender. We can tap this creature to add 1 mana of any color we control amongst permanents to our mana pool. And in this deck, this creature will always tap for 3 mana, either be it by us controlling Saheeli or just a combination of any other colored permanents. And a 2-mana mana dork that taps for 3 mana is just crazy good value. Solar Transformer, a 2-mana artifact that will enter the battlefield tapped and will generate you 3 energy. And then you can tap this artifact to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, basically accelerating your mana, acting as a 2-mana mana rock, or you can tap it, pay 1 energy and add 1 mana of any color. Now this card is probably one of the top 5 cards in the deck, because whenever you drop this on turn 2, you will get to accelerate your mana and you will get 3 energy, which will then in turn enable you to instantly use Saheeli's ability the moment she comes down. Lumbering World Wagon, a 3-mana vehicle which power and toughness will be equal to the amount of lands you control. Since we do play a ton of ramp in this deck, this vehicle will always have a huge amount of power. But the real reason why it is included in the deck is whenever it enters a battlefield or it attacks, we get to search our library for a basic land card and put it into play tapped. And this thing gets absolutely ridiculous with Saheeli, because when you do create a token copy out of this card, it will enter and allow you to fetch a basic, and it will already be a 5/5 creature, so you don't even have to crew it anymore to swing with it. Then you can just swing with the token copy and you will get to fetch another basic land. And that in itself is already a really insane interaction. But you can also use Saheeli to crew the original vehicle and also swing with it, allowing you to get another basic land. How this looks like in an actual game of playing this deck is on turn 3 you will drop this vehicle, get yourself a basic land accelerating your mana. On turn 4 you will drop Saheeli. If you then have the 3 energy, you will copy Lumbering World Wagon. Then you tap Saheeli to crew the original World Wagon. Then you swing with both the original and the copy and you will get 2 more basic lands in play. And this way, as early as turn 4, you will already have 8 lands in play, which is just ridiculous. And you can just keep crewing the original World Wagon with Saheeli, which will be at a huge amount of power and toughness because you just fetched that many lands out of your deck. And the last card in this section is Steamer Battlecrier, a 3-mana 4/3 creature with an ability that will reduce the cost of any spell you play during your turn by 1 generic mana for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. And this card is just really strong, and I didn't even know this card existed before making this video, because in itself, if you drop this creature as early as turn turn 3, any future spell you cast during your turn will be 1 mana cheaper. If you have Saheeli on the battlefield, all costs of spells you play will be reduced by 2 mana, because Saheeli also is a 4-power creature. If you make a copy out of this card with Saheeli, it will be a 5/5 creature, and you will have this effect on the board 2 times. So you have a 5/5 copy, the original Saheeli on the battlefield, and since you control this effect 2 times, it will reduce the cost of anything you play during your turn by a massive amount of 6 mana. And as you can imagine, casting a 3-fold Thunderhulk for just 1 generic mana is absolutely ridiculous. This honestly might be one of the most underrated and under the radar cards I've seen in a long time. Next up, we have the card advantage section. This section is filled with card draw engines that will ensure our hand stays filled throughout the course of the game. And some of these cards have some really crazy effects when you combine them with Saheeli. Idol of Oblivion, a 2-mana artifact we can tap to draw a card, but we can only activate this ability if we created a token this turn. Obviously, the main game plan of this deck is creating a token every single turn with Saheeli, so this card basically just ensures us 1 extra card draw on every turn. And if you really do desperately need to draw some cards, you can even copy this artifact with Saheeli, and you can tap both the original and the copy you just generated to actually draw 2 cards. It also has an ability for 8 mana and tapping and sacrificing it to generate some sort of an Eldrazi token, but we don't really care about that ability. Garruk's Uprising, a 3 mana enchantment that has 3 passive effects. Whenever this enchantment enters the battlefield and we control a creature with power 4 or greater, we will get to draw a card. So whenever you have Saheeli herself or a copy made by her on the battlefield and you play this, it will basically replace itself, acting as some sort of a cantrip. For as long as this enchantment is on the battlefield and a creature with power 4 or greater enters, we get to draw a card. So whenever you play any of your big creatures or you create a 5/5 token copy with Saheeli, it will draw us even more cards. And passively, this enchantment will also give all our creatures trample, which is just perfect if you, for example, just copied a Cultivator of Blades, gave a huge stat boost to your entire board. This card will ensure you can get combat damage through and you can be chum blocked. And those abilities in themselves are enough to include this card in the deck. But it gets even crazier when you copy this enchantment with Saheeli. Because let's say you have Saheeli and this enchantment on the battlefield and you then decide to create a 5/5 token copy of this enchantment. First up, the 5/5 token copy will trigger the original Garruk's Uprising, drawing you a card. Then the token copy will trigger its own first ability, because it enters and it sees that you control a creature with 4 or greater power. And then the token copy will also trigger its own last ability, because it will see itself enter as a 5-power creature and you will get to draw a card of it. So whenever you copy this simple enchantment with Saheeli, it will draw you a total of 3 cards, which is a really good showcase of how some magic rulings work. Temur Ascendancy. This card will passively give all creatures you control haste, meaning if you do place some of the big creatures in this deck, you will instantly be able to swing with them and generate some value, be it a Twin Flame Tyrant, Badbreaker Ibex, or even a 3-fold Thunderhulk. And the second effect is basically the same thing as a Garruk's Uprising. Whenever a creature enters a battlefield under your control with power 4 or greater, you get to draw a card. And whenever you copy this with Saheeli, it will also draw you 2 cards. Because a 5/5 token copy will enter, the original will trigger and give you a card, and then the copy you just created will see itself enter as a 5/5 creature and will also trigger and draw you a card. Kyora, Behemoth Beckoner. For 3 mana, you get a Simic Planeswalker that enters the battlefield with a massive 7 loyalty counters. And passively, whenever a creature enters a battlefield under your control, you once again get to draw a card. Just perfect because it will trigger whenever you copy something with Saheeli or you play one of your big creatures. Sadly, you can't copy this Planeswalker with Saheeli like the previous 2 enchantments because it is a legendary permanent and you will have to sacrifice the original or the copy to the legend rule. But in exchange, we can use the -1 loyalty ability to untap any permanent we control, which is just a really nice nifty little way to tap a land for mana, untap it again and make it produce an additional mana. So Kyora will give us both card draw and mana acceleration. Greater Good, a 4 mana enchantment with an activated ability. We can sacrifice a creature to draw cards equal to the power of the sacrificed creature, and then we have to discard 3 cards. This card is included in the deck because at the end of the turn we will have to sacrifice any copy we made with Saheeli anyways. Instead of sacrificing it to Saheeli's effect, we can then choose to sacrifice it to Greater Good instead, which will then allow you to draw 5 cards and then discard 3 cards, netting you a total of 2 cards in the process. Since the creature tokens were about to be sacrificed anyways, we might as well get some cards out of them, right? And later in the game, if you really desperately need some card draw, you can just start sacrificing any of your big creatures to actually refill your hand. Disciple of Realize, a 6 mana MDFC creature. Whenever this creature enters a battlefield, we get the option to sacrifice another creature we control. Then we get to gain X life and draw X cards, X being the sacrificed creature's power. And for the same reasons as Greater Good, this is just a perfect creature to drop in your second main phase after you created a 5/5 token copy with Saheeli. Because the creature token would die at the end of the turn anyways, you can then just sacrifice it to Disciple of Realize and turn it into a massive 5-card card draw spell. Obviously, paying 6 mana for this type of effect isn't the best value. But that being said, it is an MDFC card, meaning if you don't need this card, you can just play the backside, which is a land that taps for 1 green mana, and you can even make it enter untapped for the small cost of 3 life. As I keep repeating in all my videos, there really is no downside to playing any of these MDFC cards in your decks. And the last card in this section is Thought Monitor, a 7 mana 2/2 flying creature that has affinity for artifacts, meaning its cost is reduced by 1 generic mana for each artifact you control. And thanks to the Saheeli copies being artifacts, all the mana rocks we play, token generators like Simulacrum Synthesizer, and any other artifact creatures we play in this deck, you can usually cast this card for just a 1 blue mana. And whenever it enters a battlefield, it will draw you 2 cards. Just a really simple, really cheap artifact body that gives you some awesome card advantage for just 1 mana. Next up, we have the interaction and protection section. Since most of this deck actually resolves around controlling Saheeli at all times, we do play a ton of ways to protect her. And since we are in Tamer colors, we do have access to some great bounce effects, counter magic, and removal spells. This actually gives us a way to deal with any of the things our opponents are doing and disrupt their game plan, because we can't win the game if we actually lose the game. An offer you can't refuse. A 1 mana spell that allows us to counter any non-creature spell on the stack. In return, the controller of the countered spell does get to generate 2 treasure tokens. And this is one of the most efficient counter spells ever printed. Because let's say you control Saheeli and some other value creatures and an opponent decides to play a board wipe. For just a low cost of 1 mana and giving them 2 treasure tokens, you get to prevent the wipe, save all your permanents from being destroyed, and you can then win the game on a later turn. Galvanic Discharge, a 1 mana instant speed spell that allows us to choose a creature or a planeswalker on the battlefield. Then we get to generate 3 energy counters, and we can pay any amount of energy to deal that much damage to the chosen target creature or planeswalker. And this spell actually has 2 functions in this deck. The first and the most obvious is that we can turn our energy into an actual damage spell that we can use to remove any problematic creature on the battlefield with. But you can also use this simple 1 mana spell to generate you 3 energy and not actually use it to remove something. Because in some games it will happen that you have the perfect Saheeli hand, you have a value creature to copy, you have Saheeli on the battlefield, but you have no way to generate energy. Then you can just use a simple 1 mana card to generate the 3 energy, which is perfect for Saheeli, and you can use her to copy something. Pongify. For 1 mana, on instant speed, you get to destroy any creature on the battlefield. But in return, the controller of that creature will get a 3/3 green monkey token in return. If your opponent is about to win the game with an infinite combo using one of their creatures, you can just use 1 mana, remove the combo piece, and you will be fine. And over the course of the game, with the amount of value we will be generating in this deck, the 3/3 token really doesn't matter. Stubborn Denial. This 1 mana spell will counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1 generic mana. And this honestly is a pretty horrible effect, even for the low cost of 1 mana. But this card also has the Ferocious mechanic, meaning whenever we control a creature with power 4 or greater, we just get to counter any spell on the stack. Countering any spell for just the cost of 1 mana is really efficient, and no other card in Magic actually does this. And since Saheeli has 4 power herself, whenever we have her on the battlefield, we can just leave the 1 mana open to actually protect her. Cyclonic Rift, the first game changer we play in this deck. For 2 mana, you get an instant speed spell that allows you to bounce any non-land permanent you don't control, which in itself is already really solid value. But the main reason why this card is included and why they turned it into a game changer is that it has the overload ability. Meaning if you cast this for a total of 7 mana, you get to bounce any non-land permanent you don't control. And overloading a Cyclonic Rift will just reset the boards of all of your opponents, and usually whenever you cast this for its overload cost, you just win the game. Because your board won't be affected by this and your opponents will have to start rebuilding from 0. Heroic Intervention. intervention. For 2 mana, you get to give all permanents you control hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. As I mentioned earlier in the video, the biggest weakness of this deck are actually board wipes. Whenever you think your opponent is about to cast a board wipe, you can just leave the 2 mana open, cast a heroic intervention, and save all your permanents from going to the graveyard. And you can also use this if someone is playing a spot removal spell targeting Saheeli to just prevent that from happening, because Saheeli will get hexproof. Volatile Stormdrake, a 2 mana 3/2 flying creature that basically is the modern variant of Gilded Drake. Whenever this creature enters a battlefield, you have to exchange control of this creature and a creature an opponent controls. When you do, you get to generate 4 energy. Then you will get the option to pay energy equal to the cost of the creature you exchange with. If you don't, that creature gets sacrificed. And this creature has multiple functions in this deck. First up, you can just use it as a 2 mana removal spell that will also generate you 4 energy in the process. Because if someone, for example, controls an Ur-Dragon, you can just cast your Volatile Stormdrake, change control of the Drake and the Ur-Dragon. You will get 4 energy in the process. And if you then decide to not pay the energy cost of the Ur-Dragon just gets sacrificed, acting as some sort of a removal spell. And netting you some energy in the process you can then later use with Saheeli. Or you can use this to steal any of your opponent's most valuable creatures. Let's say an opponent, for example, controls a Krenko, you can just cast your Volatile Stormdrake. Krenko and Stormdrake get swapped off controller. You can pay the 4 energy and you now have your own Krenko for yourself. And you can start generating an army of goblins. But even better, if that Krenko was their commander, they have no way to get their commander back. Because now the Krenko is on your side of the board. If your opponents have no way to destroy it or bounce it, it will just stay under your control and they have no way to actually return it to their command zone and cast it again. Volatile Stormdrake honestly is a really underrated card. You can even easily include this card in some non-energy decks. It's just that good. Bridgeworks Battle. This 3 mana sorcery will give any creature you control +2/2 until the end of turn, and then it fights a creature you don't control. This is just a really solid removal spell because we play some really huge creatures. We can just boost their stats, fight something, and remove a creature on the board that threatens our game plan. And if you don't need the spell, once again, just play the backside, which is a land that taps for green mana and it even enters untapped whenever you pay 3 life for it. Fierce Guardianship, another game changer we play in this deck. For 3 mana, we get to counter target non-creature spell, which in itself isn't the best value. But whenever we control our commander, instead of paying this spell's mana cost, we can actually cast it for free, giving us a free counter spell to protect anything on our board with. Honestly, all the cards that cost 0 mana whenever you control your commander are absolutely broken in my opinion and should be banned in the format. That being said, this card is just way too good not to include in the deck. Druid of Purification. Whenever this creature enters, starting with us, every player gets to vote. Each player at the table then gets to pick 1 enchantment or artifact we don't control. Then this card will destroy each permanent chosen this way. And this card is good for a couple of reasons. First up, whenever it enters, you can just pick the problem artifact or enchantment you want to deal with and it will be destroyed by your vote. And on top of that, it will destroy an additional 3 permanents depending on what your opponents choose. And since this card states permanents you don't control, only your opponents will be affected by this. Your opponents won't actually be able to vote on any permanents you control. And this creature obviously is a really great target to copy with Saheeli, just ridding the board of any artifacts or enchantments. Territorial Aether Guide, a massive 6 mana 6/5 flying haste creature. Whenever this creature enters, we get to add 2 energy to our energy pool. Then we get the opportunity to pay any amount of energy and this creature will then deal that much damage to each other creature. And you can just use this effect to wipe the board of any small creatures. Since our commander has 4 toughness and most creatures in this deck are actually huge creature bodies, you can usually pay 3 energy for this effect and wipe the board of any small value creatures, any mana dorks, any tokens, and this card will just generate you some really good value. And the fact that this creature also generates you 2 energy whenever it enters actually makes it somewhat of a decent target to copy with Saheeli. And the last card in this section is Blasphemous Act, a 9 mana sorcery that will deal 13 damage to each creature. But in reality, this card will only cost you 1 mana because its cost is reduced by 1 generic mana for each creature on the battlefield, which is just perfect for a board wipe because you will only need this whenever the board is filled with a ton of creatures. It really is one of the most efficient board wipes ever printed. Now, we are a creature heavy deck ourselves and we don't really like board wipes, but that being said, sometimes you will just fall behind on the board and you will have to reset it or you just lose the game. And then having a card like a Blasphemous Act available to you is just a fantastic sort of panic button. And last up, we have the lands. We do have a couple of utility lands in this deck, so I'll start by going over those. Academy Ruins. For 2 mana and tapping this land, we get to put target artifact card in our graveyard on the top of our library. This is a really simple ability that allows us to recur any of our value artifacts if they are removed over the course of the game. Be it an Aetherworks Marvel, a Gonti's Aether Heart, or a Decoction module. Aether Hub. Whenever this land enters a battlefield, it generates us 1 energy. Doesn't even enter tapped, it taps for a colorless, and for the cost of 1 energy, we can even tap it for any color. This might seem really underwhelming, but trust me, sometimes you're just 1 energy short to actually activate Saheeli, and this land can fix that problem. Arena of Glory. Enters untapped whenever you control a mountain, and for the cost of 1 red mana, tapping it, we get to add 2 red mana to our mana pool. This land then does get exerted, meaning it doesn't untap at the beginning of our next upkeep, but if we use the red mana produced this way, the creature that we use it for actually gains haste, and this might make a difference in some of your games. Boseiju Who Endures. The green legendary channel land. Channel means whenever this card is in your hand, you can pay the mana cost and discard it to activate its effect. In this case, allowing us to destroy target artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land. The controller of that permanent does get to search their library for a card with the basic land type and put it onto the battlefield. Boseiju is just a fantastic way to deal with any problematic permanent on the battlefield. Be it a Field of the Dead, an Aura Shards, a Fraction Altar, and the cost of the channel abilities is reduced by 1 generic mana for each legendary creature you control. We will usually control Saheeli, so you can use this effect for only 1 green mana. This land is really expensive, but trust me, Boseiju can just really win you games. Helios 1. For 1 mana and tapping this land, we get to add 1 energy to our energy pool, which in some cases might make the difference to actually getting Saheeli activation or not. For 3 mana, tapping this land and paying X energy, we get to destroy target non-land permanent with mana value X. Later in the game gives you a way to deal with any non-land permanent by just using some of your energy counters. Mistrise Village. This land will tap for a blue mana, and for 1 blue mana and tapping it, it will ensure the next spell we cast this turn can't be countered. If you do play in a pot where a ton of counter magic is being played, this land can actually win you games. And most of the time it will enter untapped because you just need to control a mountain or a forest for it. Otawara, Soaring City, the blue channel land. Same as Boseiju, the channel cost will be reduced by 1 generic mana for each legendary creature we control. So usually you will be able to get this down to like 1 or 2 mana. And then you can use this to bounce either an artifact, a creature, a planeswalker, or an enchantment back to its owner's hand. Really solid ability, and keep in mind the channel abilities are actually activated abilities and can't be countered by counter spells. Horizon of Progress. We can tap this land for any color that any of our other lands can produce. For 3 mana and tapping it, we get to put a land card from our hand straight onto the battlefield, sort of allowing us to accelerate our mana. And the best part, for 1 mana, tapping it, we can sacrifice this land to draw a card. So later in the game, if you do have a ton of mana but you actually need to dig deep in your library to find some win cons, you can just sacrifice this land and dig a little deeper. And for the regular mana producing lands, we play 3 shock lands, 3 of the fetch lands, 3 check lands, 3 pain lands, 3 of the bond lands, a command tower, 2 of the horizon lands, a triome, and for basics we play 4 forests, 2 islands, and 2 mountains. And that's it for my take on Saheeli Radiant Creator, one of the few commanders that can actually make energy work. And honestly, this has been one of the most fun decks I've ever played. Every turn just feels like a little puzzle where you have to manage your resources and just sequence your plays so you can generate as much value as possible. She's tricky, she's complex, and she'll force you to think differently every single game you play with her. If you made it this far in the video, comment a lightning emoji so I know you watched the entire video. Hit the like button, hit subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.